Happy Sunday morning. I'm here at the Bentley Heritage Distillery, John Jeffery, the master distiller, and he will tell us a bit about his background and also walk us through this lovely lineup in front of us. So please tell us how your career began,
Yeah.
just a bit about you.
Yeah, so welcome. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
I'm a food chemist, so my background is in chemistry labs, working on, like developing food products. And in that context, my focus was on fermentation and distillation. I worked with breweries and wineries in Michigan at the time, and my professor had a desire to kind of help boost the economy in Michigan using value-added kind of projects for agricultural producers. And so we built distilleries and winery facilities in Michigan to kind of give the farmers something else to focus on and draw tourism to their operations. And in the process of doing that, serendipitously, that was at a time when craft distilling was really taking off. So I had the opportunity to meet a lot of people who were trying to start up distilleries, help them develop products, work with them in designing their facilities. And around 2013, late 2013, I had just finished building and commissioning a distillery in Madison, Wisconsin, training a staff there. And I got a call from a headhunter looking for a consultant to help on a little project in Nevada. I ended up consulting remotely, traveling into Minden for 2.5 years, including running and helping to run a small R&D distillery that we built while this was being engineered and built, to work out mash bills and work with the grains. We're a state here, so we're growing corn, rye, wheat, oats in the high desert. We're at 4,800 feet, and that's not the normal place to grow grain. So we had to make sure that what we grew was going to taste good and was going to yield well. So we built this little distillery for 2.5 years. We played with whiskey production and developed gins and fooled around on little stills, and that was during the process of building this. So that's 2015 to 2018. I moved out here in 2016 because that little project, as it was described when I first started, had grown into this, beautiful monument. And Chris and Camille asked me to come run it. So here I am.
I love this word monument that you just used. It's almost an homage to the historic and so expansive from the point of view as well of what you're trying to create. You're creating a footprint of what can be accomplished. It must be so wonderful to be part of something this special.
Yeah, it really is. And it is monumental. We've taken, with Chris and Camille's vision, we've taken these historical buildings built in the early 20th century and given them a new life. We're sitting inside of an old decommissioned mill that is once again kind of using grain to make products for people, beautiful things for people. The butter plant, the creamery behind us, was taken apart, put back together. We're using the first well ever dug in this area for our production water. And this could have been a little craft, kind of smaller project that would grow over time. But it became clear that what Chris and Camille really wanted was something that would, be kind of their legacy to this area. Chris grew up in the area, and he wanted to leave something for generations. So this will be that.
Thoughtful. And in the era when words like sustainable just became more of a marketing speak than the truth, you creating a proof of concept and you scaling it, which is a fascinating aspect. A lot of us gravitate towards small, boutique, artisanal, the buzzwords, and associate quality with that. But that's not really the truth, is it?
Not necessarily. There are a lot of smaller producers who don't have the background or don't aren't able to take the time to really learn the artistry and the mastery of things, of making things like this. And so you'll get people talking about that smaller means better, but it doesn't necessarily. If they don't have the background or if they don't have the capacity to to dictate what their raw materials are, and they're just buying from whichever supplier they can find. We're growing all of our raw materials, and one of the biggest things that drew me to the project was as we were talking about sustainable and reuse and repurposing, we'd get into talking about energy recovery and water consumption because we are in the desert, and the byproducts that come off of distilling. And in every case, we always had the kind of the impetus and the permission really to find the ways to be most efficient and conservative in our use of materials. So we reuse energy wherever we can. We run one of the largest, if not the largest, composting operations in the state. So all of our spent grain goes out to compost, and that goes back on the land to improve the soil that we're growing the grain on. And so, everywhere we're able, we're being good stewards of the land and building something that, that won't deplete the environment.
It's such an impressive trifecta. You have the historical background, the reverence, you have the artisanal aspect of it, and the know-how, and you also have the funding.
Yeah.
You have the capacity to create, to actually put your vision into fruition and create the scale that makes sense in your context.
Yeah.
So that's quite a unique confluence, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. It really is. Chris and Camille were never shy about saying that, they wanted to use the resources that they dedicated to this project to do everything, in the most beautiful and sustainable way. And that began with the initial kind of concept designs for these buildings where we talked about anything from, the sort of cathedral element of the creamery as you walk in, the way it kind of, there's some Frank Lloyd Wright elements of kind of contracting and expanding there. To give you the experience of walking into the building, to buying the best equipment, to investing in sustainable operations, and we for example the ranch and heritage, the distillery, work hand in hand obviously because they're growing our raw materials, but from the beginning we would throw these ideas out about what we could be growing or what we should be growing, and the easiest thing in the world would be to go source, modified yellow dent corn because it'll grow anywhere and it's practically invincible. But when we talked about quality and heritage and history, we landed on a heritage variety of corn that hasn't been grown in this region and that is really rarely grown commercially, because one, it makes beautiful whiskey, and two, corn evolved in the desert. And so there's this element of kind of returning a heritage crop and a traditional crop back to the environment in which it evolved, rather than relying on the, sort of modified, scientifically manipulated crops that are designed to produce cattle feed, not really to produce, human food or good flavors or be kind to the soil that it's growing in. Those are crops that have been modified for very specific things, and they deplete the soil. And we're composting and trying to improve the soil, so that made a lot of sense for us as well. Every detail. There are very few things that someone hasn't, kind of picked at to see if there wasn't a better way for us to do it. Whether it's myself or Chris and Camille or any of our team, we're constantly trying to implement, continuous improvement concepts around is there a single-use material that we can stop using today and go shopping for alternatives to it.
What an extraordinary level of dedication. That's definitely uncommon. Walking the facility, it is a bit of a religious experience. Not in an imposing sense, but there's a sense of grandeur.
Yeah.
And yet, the human pieces of it show up right away.
Yeah.
The fact that you care so deeply about what goes in your bottle eventually, where it's sourced from. When you say flask grain to flask, you really mean it in every possible sense. And I am very gratified that you don't rest on your laurels, even though, obviously your spirits are exceptional in terms of quality. But you keep improving incrementally what composes them.
Yeah.
And that's something I don't hear often.
Yeah. Well, we try to encourage everyone on staff to ask the questions, to try to figure out if there's something better we can do. We're always doing continuing education and sending people off to bring bits and pieces back to us, and trying to train each other as we learn things. It's not uncommon for us to, even in production, to go find a problem that maybe we thought we solved, but it seems like we could improve, and someone from the staff will start downloading, research papers and doing the background research, and will come back to us and say, here's what I found. Is it worth implementing? Is it not? Is it feasible? Is it not?
Wow.
We try to empower everybody to participate in that because, you need everyone to feel like they have, one, ownership and a hand in kind of improving it, but two, using something like the title master, I think, inclines people to feel like they've mastered it completely and they know all the answers. To me, I'm just the person who's had the opportunity to make the most mistakes in the room, and I know the value of learning from them and having people kind of around you who are trying to poke at everything and see if there's see if there's more ground we can make up.
Again, I love that word empowerment. It's clearly about teamwork, common mindset, shared values, and that translates into product.
Yeah.
We have a great little lineup here that I can't wait for you to describe and taste with you.
Good. So we'll start on your right there.
Okay.
The first thing we'll taste is the white vodka. So this is from a base of wheat and oat, a mixed grain mash bill, distilled on that beautiful German hybrid pot still that you saw through the tall copper columns.
It's very beautiful.
Copper is important because it scrubs spirit. It's a reactive metal, so it kind of cleans the spirit up. The first thing I like to note about it is it's not as neutral as most vodkas you're accustomed to.
I was just running through my mind. You literally read my mind.
Yeah. So you're picking up character from the grain, right?
Yeah.
And there is a nose to it. It's a little sweet. There's some vanilla and almonds there. And as much as vodka drinkers don't necessarily sit and sip and do tasting notes, the nice thing about the vodka, especially when you taste it, I think, is that it has a viscosity and a weight that brings a little more to to drinking vodka than most do. And I noted that it sounds like from your name you have Eastern European heritage.
I do.
The word vodka existed before modern continuous stills existed. And continuous column stills are what give us completely neutral spirit. But vodka in Russia and Poland and the Ukraine was being made before we could make neutral spirit. It had a lot of character, and it tasted like rye and like potatoes, and it had grain and raw materials character. So this, in some ways, people like to think of a characterful vodka as like this modern expression of craft distilling. It's really much more of a heritage-driven thing. The root of the word coming from these countries where they couldn't clean it. Yeah, from little water.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. Wow, that texture.
Yeah.
That's what stands out, the viscosity, the unctuous.
Yeah, it's silky, isn't it?
It does. I mean, honestly, tasting it blind, I would probably be second-guessing whether it's vodka.
Yeah.
Even though that's the first thought that leaps to mind. But it's not.
You wouldn't be able to pin down necessarily, right? Yeah. Yeah, and, everything we're doing is unusual, so why not the vodka, right?
And again, it's supposed to be a neutral spirit, a canvas, a blank slate. Yeah. And this isn't that. This is an interesting little story. Yeah,
it has its own character, and there's something to experience there rather than something to sort of bring the alcohol to the flavors in a glass.
Absolutely. To me, this is sipping opportunity.
Yeah.
I'm beyond excited about the next one. I got a little preview, so.
Yeah. So speaking of sipping. Obviously, it takes a little while for whiskey to age, and we definitely are on the whiskey side, particularly in this building where we're making single malt. Our hearts kind of leap to the Speyside area where the use of used sherry barrels, used bourbon barrels is the primary way of aging the spirits, but it takes much longer. And so one of the things we wanted to do was have a way from the beginning to kind of shout out to that, to that tradition. And so we took the same vodka and we rested it in small sherry barrels, just enough time to extract the sherry from the barrel, because there's always some sherry left in the wood once they pull the wine out, and also to pull some color and some of the flavor of the oak. So this is Spanish oak with Oloroso sherry for just right around a month. And the thing that I would say about it is that a normal neutral vodka would not hold up to the character that's being drawn from the barrels. The viscosity of the spirit makes it enough of a lingering experience that, you can sit and enjoy kind of the floral, fruity nature of the sherry wine while you taste it.
You're such a wordsmith. I love the language, lingering. That's exactly, again, mind reader. It has a lasting finish.
Yeah. Yeah, which a vodka shouldn't, much less a flavored vodka, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's kind of a bit shocking.
Yeah. So what's funny is, people see this and aren't really sure what to do with it, but, we make old fashions with it. We treat it like, any brown spirit, and it holds up because of that kind of density and sweetness of the vodka.
Again, a bit of a mind bender.
Yeah.
Would not recognize it as such if I wasn't told what
Right.
it was.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So those are our 2 vodkas. Those fall under the brand name Source One, and that's a shout out to that well that I talked about. That small silo out behind us was built from the material that we pulled out of the middle of the silos here. So we built that silo to house well number 1, the first well dug in the area, which is Source One. Is the root of that kind of name for the vodka brand.
Very cool.
The gin brand is, we call Juniper Grove. There are 3 gins. I only have 2 to taste today because the release of the 3rd one is a week from Friday. The first one we'll taste, the one on the right, is our American Dry Gin. So 5 botanicals, fresh citrus, juniper forward, pretty classic, a little more aromatic than many London dries, but citrusy and fruity and summery.
It's kind of feminine almost.
Yeah. It's bright and kind of light, and the idea here is to present kind of a classic summery gin with, perfect for a gin and tonic kind of a thing.
Very light on its feet.
Yeah.
You described it perfectly. I really have nothing to add, but in this sunlit, beautiful space, and it just makes me happy.
Yeah. Good. And still sippable, right? Still kind of creamy and silky and soft on the palate, but bright, and you can kind of sit with it. I'm still getting some of the lemon coming off the back of the palate, and that citrusy kind of summery sweetness that's so lovely in a London dry.
I'm really not a fan of austerity in any realm, but particularly in spirits. And I understand that there's a place for those as well, but to me there has to be a personality, a character, flavor profile, regardless of how much you're enamored with it.
Yeah.
And that certainly testifies to the fact that your spirits have so much persona.
Yeah.
And they're interesting.
Yeah. Well, the project itself and all of the people involved, we're all pretty strong personalities. So we're all kind of playing a part in what we want to express in the spirits, from the interesting drinks program that we have here to, I had 2 of my assistant distillers do the bulk of the work in developing that, and we kind of worked on it together as a part of, training up on how to use the equipment, and that was, sort of like their capstone for the startup process, was helping to develop that. We have an incredible team here of really just remarkable people.
Well, what they do, I think, is create something that's delicious but also quite elevated. I taste elegance, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that also tells me its own tale.
Yeah.
It's definitely very thoughtful craftsmanship.
Yeah. So the last thing we'll taste is our Atrium gin. We call it Atrium because I talked to you a little bit about our foraging process, going out into the national forest and looking for native varieties. We found a native Eastern Sierra Angelica and gentian. That's not what we ended up using, but our intent as we build these greenhouses is to get to a point where we're growing those things and starting to introduce them. So Atrium being a shout out to that greenhouse project. There are 10 botanicals here, and this is much more of a contemporary gin. So it is not going to present as juniper forward. It's going to be more floral and robust. You're going to have a tremendously kind of complex experience on the palate of, one of the things I love about tasting gin is that it's very evocative of the process of distilling gin. When we distill gin, we start up the still and we'll get individual botanicals coming off the still at different times. So at the beginning, you'll get a big burst of really intense juniper berries coming off, kind of a piney characteristic. And then behind that will come lavender, and behind that more of the citrus character of juniper. And so they come off one at a time. And what I love about the 10 botanicals in this gin is as you taste it, one at a time they'll kind of come popping up off your palate. And you won't necessarily identify each one, but it's a really complex and kind of fun experience.
It has such an intense nose. I can just smell it for half an hour and be perfectly thrilled. Of all the spirits we're experiencing, this definitely aromatically is the most intense.
Yeah. And that was really the effort, was to be, really unusual, really botanical forward, but complex and still with some delicacy, not heavy-handed.
No, not at all. I wanted to ask you about the sipping aspect of it because we touched upon it. I'm not sure that in the U.S. there's culturally a lot of context for that.
Yeah.
When we go to cocktails, we just tend to drink them.
Yeah.
Same with wine, actually. Yes, some people sip it, but overall, a glass of wine, you drink it.
Mm-hmm.
There's not necessarily a lot of cultural practicing of aperitif and digestif either, which I've fallen in love with in Europe. Talk to me about that. Like, what is your vision? What would you like to see happen?
Yeah, so, clearly when we release the whiskeys, we're going to be trying to encourage people to sip them neat and enjoy them as they are. Mm-hmm. But you're right, gin, even, not that barrel rested vodka is a thing, but, gin traditionally is just thought of as another thing to, an element in a cocktail, and it's a magnificent element in a cocktail, but, with the kind of sweet, soft, kind of viscous nature of the spirit we're using, we love to talk to people about that. While there's sipping culture in many brown spirits, we think there's room for sipping culture in gin, like with something as complex as this with a little bit of ice, just to kind of sip on it and see if you can identify all the 10 botanicals and enjoy it as it is. A little pour like that is a really nice, gin fits as nicely next to a fireplace as whiskey does if you're really experiencing it and thinking about it and trying to dig out the intent of the producer. When you sip whiskey, you're thinking about the barrel that was used and the time that was put in. When you're sipping gin, you're thinking about why these botanicals and what experiences each botanical kind of bringing to the table. And this one in particular, the Atrium, I think is a lovely sipping gin.
Very much so. So, say a consumer that's relatively unfamiliar with gin, or perhaps had that bad experience in college, and they're somewhat curious about the category, not sure where to start.
Yeah.
What advice would you give them?
Well, clearly I'm going to be talking about our spirits. Most of the time, what people have had for a bad experience with gin is one of those really juniper-forward kind of Christmas tree pine bombs. And, that is not what we're producing in either of these. They're complex and they're soft and they're approachable. And I don't think they bring any of what those kind of classic gins bring. We're expressing something different. And when you taste our gins, you're tasting our land. You're tasting the work of our ranchers and what we do on the farm and, what, the tremendous amount of time and attention and all of the care that's taken in every step. And that's very different from what comes off of, massive production scale distilleries where they're cranking out $10 1.75 liter bottles that go to the party. We want people, we're an ultra premium product. We want people to take their time and treasure it and sip it and experience it, not just drink it.
I love your comments on the origin of it. Of course, terroir concept is pretty dominant in the wine world.
Yeah.
Thanks to the sommelier community that made sure it stuck.
Yeah.
But it's really true in the spirits world as well, if done properly.
Absolutely.
There's the origin, there's the human terroir, which is the intentionality of producing something that embraces everything, the integrity of the product that actually started in the ground, and then handling it properly. And the distillation process, there's both art and science involved. But the artistic element is your vision, is your intent, is what you impart on it.
Well, one of the things I love to talk about in terms of terroir is, we use what's called an earth tones bourbon, or an earth tones corn for our bourbon. And earth tones, is generally like the display ears that you see in like Thanksgiving displays with the many colored grains on the ear of the corn. So, the colors that we have in our earth tones are purple, green, blue, yellow, and red. And just depending on where we're at on a pivot, right? We do pivot farming here because we have to irrigate. Whether it's a little higher or a little lower, if it holds a little more water, or if it's microclimate cooler, we'll get different color combinations. So where it's lower and a little more moist, we kind of skew toward purple and blue. Where it's drier and a little warmer at the top of the pivot, we skew towards green and red. And so like just that, those colors are an indication of macronutrients and micronutrients that are different and they're developing in different combination because of the conditions that the corn is growing in. And that's just one tiny piece of the many, many pieces that we're, gathering information on and monitoring and using to optimize. So, we have a lot of attention to detail, and we really are trying to elevate some of these products and do something beautiful and new and interesting.
Clearly, the continuous evolution is part of your business plan at Bentley Heritage. What does the future look like in addition to that clear as a part of the culture and will always take place? What does the future for Bentley Heritage look like?
Well, there are sort of the obvious ways to answer that would be in kind of the broader kind of projects that we have coming. So we have additional equipment we'll be putting in. 4 years from now or so, we'll start releasing whiskeys, and that'll be bourbon, rye whiskey, single malt, and single barrels and that kind of thing. So those are kind of the straightforward things about it. But the more kind of ethereal, what is the future of Bentley Heritage? I mean, ideally, in a couple of years when we're really out of kind of the startup phase of getting all of this huge plant kind of running, everyone will have their hands in experimental releases, and we'll be taking people out to do more foraging and do small releases of, we did a couple of distillates from things like desert peach and bitterbrush that grow in this area, and those are just little blossoms that we went and hand collected and did small batches of. So a couple of years from now, we'll just kind of have this continuous stream of creative releases coming from the staff, as well as, just kind of broadening our ability to use and experiment with the equipment and tap all the, creative resources that we have in this super cool team.
I love it. What an exciting proposition for the consumer to participate as well, to come and taste all this, like you said, very limited, very experimental batches. So last but not least, what's your favorite cocktail?
Negroni, hands down. My mother's family is all Italian, and I grew up. My great-grandmother, my grandmother, and my mom sitting on the back porch drinking Campari and soda and listening to opera and crying and gossiping. And so anything Amaro based for me just goes straight to the depths of my heart. And Negroni, with with that nice balance of the expressiveness of the gin with the bitterness, and that's my drink. That's my go-to.
What a beautiful image to end this on. I'm actually visualizing it right now. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise.